Have you ever wondered how your favourite mixers achieve that smooth, upfront vocal sound? Taming vocals in a mix can be a real challenge, especially when aiming for a consistently clear and in-your-face sound throughout a track. There are many factors that go into getting a smooth vocal sound, from the microphone choice, the sound of the room it was recorded in, and even the specific notes that are being sung. These factors collectively influence the overall sound, causing certain frequencies to resonate more prominently than others, and ultimately creating an unpleasant listening experience if they go untreated. With that said, in this video, I'll be sharing a number of useful tricks with you so that you can achieve a perfectly smooth vocal sound in every mix. So let me show you how. But before we start, if you want to get your mixes to sound like professional songs, I recommend checking out Sage Audio's Mixing and Mastering membership. As a member, I have to say the experience is incredible. Just for signing up, you receive 10 free mastered songs per month with your own dedicated mastering engineer, unlimited mixing feedback, and access to Sage Audio University for in-depth mixing and mastering courses, but more on that at the end of the video. Let's first start off with a short listening exercise. I'm going to play you my vocal track, and I want you to make notes on potential problems that you hear within the vocal itself.
Cause this goes all over now, and I can't do this no more. I'm waiting for my time to come.
So after listening carefully, you may have noticed a few spots in the vocals that really jump out. And this isn't a dynamic issue that could be dealt with using compression. Instead, the problem we face here is that the vocal has a few nasty resonant frequencies that jump out on specific words and notes. So for this video, I'm going to be using Soothe 2 to help fix the issues that I just described are in my vocal track. If you've never heard of this plugin before, it essentially functions as a dynamic resonant suppressor, which is really just a fancy way of saying that it finds resonant frequencies within your tracks and attenuates them once they become too harsh. And just a quick side note, there are a number of plugins out there that will do a similar job to this one, some free and some cheaper than Soothe 2, like Smooth Operator, Silk Vocals, and TDR Nova. So feel free to use whichever plugin best suits your needs. All of the techniques I'm going to show you in this video will be transferable to those other plugins as well. So you may be asking, why not just use a regular EQ to notch out these resonant frequencies? Well, the problem with a regular EQ is that once you've made a cut, it's permanent. This works fine when you're trying to change the tonal balance of a track, but not so much when dealing with resonant frequencies, particularly in the case of a vocal track, where resonant frequencies can be quite random and are rarely ever fixed to just one troublesome area like you'd often encounter on a snare drum or a guitar track. If you use too many notch frequencies on vocals, the sound may become unnaturally hollow, thin, or robotic. Excessive notching can lead to a loss of warmth and natural resonance, making the vocals sound artificial and disconnected from the overall mix. The other issue that a regular EQ can't fix is that a lot of these resonances may only occur on certain words or notes. So permanently cutting these out will affect the entire vocal sound, and not just a few times when these resonances crop up in your vocal track. Which is why a dynamic resonance suppressor like Soothe 2 is such a handy tool to have. You can target the specific problem frequencies, and it will only suppress these whenever they become too harsh in your track, leaving the rest of the sound unaffected, resulting in a silky smooth vocal sound. But instead of just explaining how a plugin like Soothe 2 works, I think it's easier if you hear what it can do for your mix. So in this next example, I've saturated a pure sine wave so that there are a few resonances throughout the sound source, along with the actual note of the sine wave itself. This way, you'll be able to easily hear exactly how this plugin can help fix nasty resonant frequencies in your tracks on a very rudimentary audio source. I'm going to play this audio example, and I want you to listen to how the resonances change as I sweep around the frequencies. Hopefully you noticed how this plugin can help reduce the harshness in the sine wave, attenuating it so that it had a smoother, more well-rounded sound overall. So now you've heard this, you can probably imagine just how helpful this becomes when dealing with much more complex sound sources, like a human voice. Let's now test this out on an actual vocal track. A few good points to note first are that many of these plugins will come with a button named something like Delta, which allows you to solo out the sound of the effect, so you can clearly hear which part of your track is being most affected.
So take my hand and let's dance like it's 1997.
This is really useful for vocals, as you can pinpoint the exact frequencies you want to reduce, or you can be more broad with your selection and just add a nice layer of smoothness across the entire track. You can also change the sharpness and selectivity, which will further help to either narrow or broaden the sound of the effect once it's applied. So the sharpness works kind of like how adjusting the Q factor on a regular EQ works. The higher the value, the more narrow and specific the notches become, but the downside of this is that it may introduce more artifacts to your sound source. Likewise, the lower the selectivity, the more broad the overall tone shaping will become, whereas the higher the selectivity, the more the processing will focus on narrower peaks of your audio source. So try to match these settings to best fit your desired end goal, whether you're trying to target a very specific problem area or just a more broad overall tone shaping of your track. And lastly, but most importantly, the depth knob simply controls how much of this effect is applied to your track. So the higher the value, the more audible this effect will become. So let's do a quick A/B to hear how this effect smooths out my vocal track.
So take my hand and let's dance like it's 1997. So take my hand and let's dance like it's 1997.
Now you've heard how this tool can help clean up and smooth out your vocal tracks, I think it's also important to show you how not to use this effect. As there's so many active bands within this plugin that's hidden behind the simple interface, all affecting different parts of the frequency range, you can quite easily overdo this effect, and similar to what I described earlier about how too many notch frequencies on a regular EQ can leave you with a thin sounding vocal, well, the same can be said for this effect as well, when used too heavily. So let's do another listening exercise, but this time I'm going to overemphasize the effect so that you can hear how artificial and disconnected this can make your vocal sound when used too drastically.
Here will last forever, but I'm ready for this moment. I can feel it.
You can hear how removing too much of these resonant frequencies leaves you with a very strange, unnaturally thin sounding vocal track. This is because resonant frequencies aren't inherently a bad thing. Every sound source will have frequencies that poke out more than others. That's just the way sound works. This only becomes problematic once the strong resonant frequencies start to overpower everything else, which is when you want to reach for a plugin like Soothe 2 to help combat these issues. It's also important to note that where you place this plugin within your vocal chain can greatly affect the way it responds to the vocal, and depending on the desired end goal, having it earlier or later on in the vocal chain may yield you with better sounding results. If, for instance, your dry vocal already has a number of noticeable resonant frequencies before you've added any processing, it would be a good idea to tackle these earlier on in the processing chain. So, you could apply this effect straight after sculpting your dry vocal sound with EQ, to then help deal with the leftover resonant frequencies. Once this is in place, you can then apply the usual compression, saturation, and so on, which shouldn't then emphasize these resonances anymore, as you've already dealt with them earlier on in the chain. However, it may be more beneficial to use this effect later on in the chain instead, or even having two stages of this effect, one before compression and one after. Compression can often be a great tool for bringing out the best moments in your tracks, but along with this, it can also overemphasize problems within them, like resonant frequencies in a vocal track. So you may not really hear these frequencies before adding compression, but after running your vocal track through a heavy amount of this effect, you'll often find that these frequencies are now much more unpleasant to listen to. So, in this case, you want to add the effect directly after your compression to help tame this harshness that's now been brought up through the compression effect. With that said, let's take a quick listen to how this effect changes based on whereabouts in the chain you actually place it. The first example will be the effect directly applied after my EQ, and the second example will be the same effect applied after compression instead.
I met you down at the local bar on this avenue. We were young. I met you down at the local bar on this avenue. We were young.
As I mentioned earlier, if you want to get your mixes to sound like professional songs, I encourage you to check out Sage Audio's Mixing and Mastering membership. As a member, I have to say the experience is incredible. Just for signing up, you receive 10 free mastered songs per month with your own dedicated mastering engineer, unlimited mixing feedback, and access to Sage Audio University mixing and mastering courses, which include start-to-finish walkthrough sessions for various genres and 35 multi-track sessions for hands-on practice. This platform is supported by their thriving community and tight-knit network of audio engineers. Every day, I see and hear great wins in the membership from both new and seasoned engineers, noticing a huge improvement in their mixes and masters after joining. Right now, you can join the membership with a 70% lifetime discount, bringing the cost down to just $15 per month. So join today and start creating mixes that sound like professional songs.